Buenos días a todos y a todas. Me presento, mi nombre es Patricia Silva, soy abogada, gerenta legal y oficial de cumplimiento de GNL Chile, principal empresa importadora y comercializadora de gas natural licuado para la zona centro-sur del país. Quiero agradecerles a todos y a todas por el interés y acompañarnos el día de hoy en este webinar, en este seminario internacional denominado El desafío de una transición energética segura, que ha sido organizado en conjunto con la Asociación de Gas Natural y el Centro de Transición Energética de la Facultad de Ingeniería y Ciencias de la Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez, en el cual vamos a tratar ciertos elementos claves para los desafíos del título de la canción, ¿no es cierto? Una transición energética segura. Antes de entrar en materia, quiero darle el espacio a Carlos Cortés, director ejecutivo de la Asociación de Gas Natural de Chile, para que nos dé algunas palabras de bienvenida. Carlos, por favor.
Muchas gracias, Patricia. Como representante de la Asociación de Gas Natural de Chile, es para mí un honor estar acá hoy en día con ustedes, participando de este seminario internacional de tan alto nivel que estamos coorganizando en conjunto con el Centro
with the Center for Energy Transition of Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez. I'd like to thank first on behalf of the board of our association, the participation of our speakers today. I'll express Didier Holleaux, Nasirov, and also Patricia to thank you as well, the legal manager of Engie Chile, to the dean of the university, Harold Bayer, Renato Cabrera of the Department of Engineering, and Daniela Verades, who's in charge of the Center for Energy Transition of said university. This international webinar coincides with the 20 years of existence of our association, so all the topics that will be discussed this morning are quite timely, considering that we are sure that natural gas must project itself towards the future, playing a key role for the sustainable development of Chile for another 20 or more years, we hope. The world is facing huge challenges in energy. The process of decarbonization is advancing in Chile. However, ignoring the importance of energy security and safety can cause supply shocks with negative impacts on governments, the world, production, and society. Our country, fortunately, has a robust natural gas infrastructure, which use cannot be left aside. Quite on the contrary, to use the availability of this resource is an opportunity to be efficient in the process of energy transition. Natural gas, is it a transition energy? Can it provide energy security and provide flexibility that our country needs for the next decades? Allow me a special appreciation and thank you to our communication agency, Parla, to our team of consultants, and from UNICO, who were committed to make this activity possible. Without further ado, we also thank all of you for attending today and for accompanying the Association of Natural Gas in its 20th anniversary. Welcome everyone to the seminar, The Challenge Towards a Safe Energy Transition for Chile. Thank you. Excellent, Carlos. Thank you for your words. We take the opportunity to greet Daniela Olivares, Director of the Center for Energy Transition of Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez, and to thank you for all the support in promoting and organizing this international webinar. The topic is self-explanatory, the challenge for a safe energy transition. What is an energy transition? These are the changes in paradigms and models in generation, distribution, consumption of said energy to reduce as much as possible and eliminate greenhouse gas emissions. The path is not easy, and therefore it is important that we discuss these issues, to have these seminars, that the industry participates, to be able to have a good path and to reach our targets towards decarbonization, and to highlight the role that natural gas has in this path and energy transition. Let's move on then to our important panelists. We've already welcomed Carlos. We have a world-class panel who will explain what are the most important topics of the day. Considering also the current scenario that we're in, we have a COVID crisis and the Russian-Ukraine war. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Alex Barnes. He is the director of Alex Barnes Associates and advisor for the Global Gas Center. He's an independent consultant with more than 30 years in experience in this energy sector and in LNG. Recently, he became a researcher of the Institute of Energy Studies of Oxford, where they develop and writes about issues related to decarbonization, gas networks, and hydrogen. He's also an advisor for the Global Gas Center. He has a bachelor in politics philosophy and economics at the University of Oxford, and currently also has an MBA from Henley Management College. The topic of his presentation, the geopolitical crisis, the international overview of for the energy sector, and the effects on the LNG market.
Thank you, Patricia. Hello, everybody, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me. I'm now going to share my screen, and whilst hopefully that is working, I'm going to give a brief overview of what has been happening as a result of the Russian gas crisis and the effects that that has on LNG markets. So it's worth considering what was the way that the European gas market worked with LNG markets until effectively the beginning of this year. So Europe is a large market of about 480 BCM. It's supplied by various sources of pipeline gas and also LNG. Over the last 10, 15 years or so, Europe has been successful in creating an integrated single market. So it basically is a great big source of demand. And what this has meant is that for LNG cargoes which are spare or which may not be needed by buyers elsewhere, can always find a ready home in Europe. And what this meant was Europe has been supplied with LNG by the traditional sort of longer term contracts into places like Spain and Italy and France. But more recently, there's been quite a big growth of shorter term contracts. And what this has meant is that Europe has acted as kind of like the balancing market for the global LNG market, which itself has become more flexible and more traded. And what this meant was that for a long time, Europe as the balancing market benefited from the fact that when LNG prices were high, it took less LNG and took more Russian gas, because Gazprom was a very good supplier to Europe for many years and basically made sure that Europe had enough gas if there was extra demand or if supplies of LNG weren't elsewhere. And when LNG prices were low, Europe took more of this spot LNG. And you can see this on the chart on the left, and hopefully you can see my pointer. So you can see that the blue charts here, these are the flexible LNG imports into Northwest Europe, because that's largely where a lot of this spot LNG went. And you can see that when prices were high in Asia, the green line here, less of that LNG came into Europe. And when the prices were low and started approaching the European price, the market price, TTF, which is this blue line here, you'd get more LNG coming. And what's also interesting is these green dots along the bottom of these charts. These are so-called reloads. So when prices were high in Asia and higher compared to prices in Europe, cargoes that were actually delivered to Europe were often reloaded and then sent to Asia. So this was the historical pattern. And what you also see, the numbers on this part of the screen here, is that LNG terminal utilization was fairly low. Some of them were higher than others, but it was fairly low because, as I say, Europe relied on LNG for a certain portion of its gas supply, but it wasn't the major part of it. And it acted as a flexible source of demand for LNG. And that worked very well for a number of years. Unfortunately, the situation has now completely changed, and this is all due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the resulting impacts on the gas markets. And what we saw at the end of 2021 was that Russian gas actually started, there was a reduction in supply in Q4 21 to Europe. And this is when prices first started to tick up. So looking at Russian supplies to the EU 27 plus the UK, this is 2019, which is kind of normal levels, about 180 BCM. 2020, we obviously had COVID, so demand was down across the board. But what is interesting is that even though 2021, we were coming out of COVID and demand was picking up for gas, you didn't see an increase in Russian supplies. And most of this sort of little decrease compared to 2020 was in that final quarter. So and now we have the situation where Gazprom or Russian gas pipeline flows to Europe are about 80% below what they would be in a normal year. So they're now only about 27 billion cubic meters a year on an annualized basis compared to 180. And there's a very real concern that those gas flows will end sometime in the near future. To be honest, we don't know. We just know that we're in a very uncertain situation. So what this means is that, of course, Europe now needs to buy a lot more LNG. And this is what we've seen this year. This is a chart from ACER, which is the European Energy Regulator. And for anybody who's really interested in how the European gas market works, they do some fantastic reports. But what we can see is that you've seen LNG compensate for the decrease in Russian gas flows. And here is the TTF price and the Asian price. And what you will notice on the previous chart, we were showing that the Asian price was often above or mirroring the TTF price. Now what we're seeing is that TTF price is often going above the Asian price. And that is what is helping attract LNG into the European market. So rather than Europe becoming a flexible source of demand for LNG, in the sense that when prices are high elsewhere, Europe can take extra pipeline gas and therefore more LNG is available elsewhere. Now we have the situation where actually Europe doesn't have that pipeline flexibility and it really needs that LNG because it's got a great big gap to fill. And we can see here what have been the effects. So this is first half of 2021. Russian pipeline supplies were about 30.5%. It dropped down to 20% in the first half of 22, and that's a drop of nearly 30 BCM. And then you can see that LNG, particularly from the US, has increased significantly. But what is important to notice is that because LNG supplies are fairly tight at the moment, that is gas that probably would have gone elsewhere. And so effectively, Europe is prepared to pay very high prices to make sure that it gets the gas. And that, of course, means that other countries who might not be able to pay the higher prices can't get that gas. And this chart here just essentially shows how prices have risen. So here are the normal prices on the bottom left-hand screen at the middle of 2021. The end of 21, they started rising because people were concerned that gas storage wasn't being filled, and there was this the signs of curtailment of Russian gas. And you can see that the levels from around, say, 25 euros per megawatt hour, now they're well over 100. And there have been some very, very high spikes in between. So we are facing a really serious supply shock. This shows how those LNG terminals that I showed you at the beginning had very relatively low levels of utilization. And you can see 21 versus 2022, you can see that pretty much across the board, LNG terminal utilization has increased significantly. So again, this just shows that Europe is very much relying on LNG to replace that lost Russian gas. This is the so-called EU Repower EU program, which is saying, how can we react? How can we deal with this Russian supply? And the important figure to notice here is that by 2030, Europe, the EU says we need to import an extra 50 BCM of LNG a year. And that's a significant increase. To put it in perspective, you know, that's a little under 10% of the current global LNG market. So that is bound to have an impact. Obviously, by the mid-2020s, we expect more LNG supply to come on stream. But in the meantime, it means that we're in a tight market. And then this chart basically is to give you an idea of the scale of the LNG market. So as you can see here, the total market is just a little bit over 500 BCM. And Russian flows, just a bit of simple arithmetic, 180 BCM is equivalent to 35% of 2021 global market. So if we lost all Russian supplies, that's effectively what you're going to look, unless you take other measures such as energy efficiency or use of alternative sources of energy. And that's quite a big chunk. That's equivalent to some of the really big buyers like Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. And the 50 BCM is equivalent to twice what South and Central America imported in 2021, and the same as the rest of the world. So you can see the supply crunch. So Europe, as I say, going from being a balancing market is now sort of having a real impact on general demand for LNG. Again, another sign that Europe is going to be an even bigger LNG player in the future is on the left, you have all the existing LNG terminals, and we saw how they were more utilized than they were in the past. And we have a whole load of proposals, and some of these are coming on very, very quickly indeed. Some of the German terminals are due to be on stream much, much quicker than originally anticipated. So basically in the next year or so. So in conclusion, we have the situation that because effectively for many years, Gazprom was a reliable supplier to Europe and acted in a very kind of benign way, effectively making sure that Europe had enough gas, even if LNG was going elsewhere. That situation has completely changed. I can't see a situation where Russian gas will ever be again allowed to play a similar role, simply because, or have a similar size market share, simply because Europe has been so badly affected and caught out by the unexpected cutoff in Russian gas supplies, not to mention the political fallout from the war in Ukraine. The lack of short-term alternatives has meant is Europe is willing and so far able to pay very, very high prices for LNG and high prices for gas in the European market. But clearly this has an impact on other buyers until more LNG supply comes on stream. And the longer term impact on global LNG market depends on Europe's overall sort of policies. Europe has said it wants to be net zero by 2050, and this could accelerate that. But it requires successful implementation of certain things, such as reducing overall energy demand, electrification of European energy demand through renewable electricity, and the growth of low carbon gases, green hydrogen and biomethane. But it's worth noting that although European consumption of natural gas on an unabated basis will decline if Europe meets its 2050 targets, Europe will probably still be a large consumer of gas in 2050, but in combination with carbon capture and storage, either producing hydrogen or more likely just in terms of power stations, etc. But of course, we're a long way from 2050. A lot of these policies are still yet to actually come into effect. So that's quite trying to predict that future is challenging. I hope that's given you a nice overview of what the situation is, and I shall stop sharing my screen now. Just one thing, my contact details and these slides will be made available to you.
Thank you so much, Alex, for your presentation. Super complete and super clear. I just have a few questions. I was just reading like some news this morning, and the European Commission present proposal in regard to the gas price cap on Tuesday. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Sure. So there's been a lot of speculation because Europe is paying very high prices, whether in order to try and manage this, the European Commission will propose price caps on wholesale gas prices. And a number of member states supported this. In terms of the gas price caps, they've kind of rode back a bit in the sense that it's a bit more technical market intervention, but there are a couple of proposals in there which are significant for LNG. The first is that they're proposing central buying of LNG. So in other words, they will get European buyers together to buy LNG on a joint basis. And the idea is that this will increase the buying power of European companies who need to buy gas. Now, the thing is, when you look through the proposals, it's a bit of sort of muddled thinking, to be honest, because it says that, you know, these buyers would have to aggregate their demand and then figure out, you know, how much they need over what time period, etc. We already have a very big liquid market in Europe in TTF. And that already does the job of aggregating all the demand on the European side, which gives the very clear signals to the sellers on the supply side, LNG suppliers, for example, as to what is required. And the fact that we have managed to suck in a lot of LNG quite quickly, and basically, so, you know, we're taking as much as we can now. It's physical constraints that are causing problems. It's hard to see how this buyer platform will actually work. The other proposal they've put in place is to have a separate LNG price benchmark, because a lot of LNG contracts or gas sold into Europe is linked to the TTF price, and they say there's a disconnect between the two. But I think this shows a major misunderstanding of the role that TTF plays, and it's not really certain how creating an LNG benchmark, which by definition will be less liquid with fewer buyers and sellers than the overall TTF, will actually lead to a better outcome. I can understand the policymakers' frustration with the high gas prices, but they're actually caused by something very obvious, a massive supply shock, and the market is working exactly as you would expect, and it is helping deal with the crisis. So I don't think that these proposals are particularly helpful.
And taking that in consideration, Alec, what would be your recommendation in regard to this topic?
Okay, one has to do something to address the high gas prices in Europe. You know, they're 4 or 5 times higher than we're used to, and that has impacts on consumers. So you definitely need targeted aid on consumers, but that should be aiming financial support at the consumers. Now, that could be domestic consumers, poorer domestic consumers. It could be industry, which, for example, if they don't maintain a certain amount of gas demand, they have to shut down permanently. So that's on one side. So I'm not saying do nothing, and I'm not saying that we don't have to take what I would call emergency measures. In terms of the market, what I would suggest is the market seems to be doing a very good job of attracting LNG, and also the electricity market is doing a good job of signaling that because gas prices are high, electricity prices are high because of the way gas works in pricing. What you should do is, rather than trying to mess with the pricing mechanism, which does a good job at allocating resources and attracting resources, you should focus on encouraging measures which can help manage Europe's position. So what I would say, one of the obvious things is, in terms of electricity, gas is often used as the marginal source of supply for electricity. If you were to say, and they've proposed price caps on electricity, rather than proposing price caps, I would use windfall tax profits, but I would allow companies to invest in electricity flexibility, be that demand flexibility, be that battery storage, as a way of reducing that peak demand and therefore lessening the need for gas. And the benefit of that over the kind of more short-term measures they're doing is that it actually does exactly the kind of thing you need to do for the energy transition. In terms of gas demand, I would do everything I can to make people use less gas by insulation, energy efficiency. Now, some of these things will take time to affect, but rather than just subsidizing and putting in price caps, you should direct the investment to where it is actually going to be productive in helping us get to net zero.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for your answer. Really complete. Just one more last question. We talk about it, you mentioned it in your last answer, like, will the current crisis accelerate the European energy transition?
Well, in theory, this is a golden opportunity to improve energy efficiency, for example. Europe has had energy efficiency targets since about 2009, but they only met their 2020 targets because COVID artificially depressed demand. So actually, and the targets they put forward as part of their Fit for 55 package were even more ambitious in terms of the annual percentage decrease in energy demand compared to 2020. So in theory, you should say, well, if you use less energy, you make yourself more secure and make yourself less vulnerable to shocks like this. The problem is that a lot of the, as I mentioned a minute ago, the proposals seem to be a bit more short-term. And I'm not saying you don't need short-term support for consumers. What I'm saying is, be a bit smarter about how you do it. So you need both sorts of measures. I think the other problem is there's actually a very real risk that by tinkering around with the way that the gas market works and to a certain extent the electricity market works, they'll make those markets less efficient. So you'll end up having a less efficient energy market, which means that if you have a less efficient energy market, you're not allocating resources in the best way. You will make it more difficult to achieve net zero. I mean, it is actually ironic that the very sort of sector that has done very well in sort of signaling, or the very market that has signaled you need to increase imports and reduce demand, because we have seen big demand reduction in Europe, they're now trying to mess around with. And I think that of it, if you start subsidizing energy too much, guess what? People don't consume less of it.
Yeah. No, definitely, Alex. We have seen that in every parts of the world. You start subsidizing and people just change their lifestyle. They don't change their consume. Thank you so much again for your presentation. Super clear, important topics. Let's go with our next, nuestro siguiente panelista. Disculpen el cambio de lenguaje.
We're continuing with our next guest, and we have Didier Holleaux. He's the president of Eurogas and executive vice president of Engie. He has more than 30 years of a career when it comes to energy sectors and in gas and oil. He was a president of Eurogas in June 2021. He works in Engie, and from that moment he has been part of the company, and he's the executive vice president of Engie. Didier Holleaux, welcome. The floor is yours. So if you can share your screen, that will be great. And Didier is going to talk about natural gas. Is that still a transition type of energy?
Didier, you have your mic off. Sorry.
I will speak without slides so that I don't have to share my screen. So Engie, as many of you may know, is a worldwide energy company, and we are very active in Chile, in the gas business in the north of Chile, but also in the power transmission business and in energy solution. And I will mention it a bit later when we speak from switching from coal to gas. So when we try to answer the question, is natural gas a transition energy source? The first answer I must give is that obviously before the current gas crisis, the answer was an obvious yes. Why? For three main reasons. First, gas is the quickest way to go out of coal and therefore save as much as we can from our carbon budget. And there is a very good example in Chile, particularly where Engie used to operate more than 1 gigawatt of coal-fired power plants. And with a plan that we agreed with the Chilean government 2 years back, we started converting, improving our investment in renewable energy, but also converting some of these power plants either to biomass or to gas, so as to reduce very significantly our carbon footprint. And that's clearly one of the main reasons why gas is part of the transition, that it will avoid burning coal. The second thing, which is very important, is that when you develop wind and solar power, and to a lesser extent, hydroelectric power, you have relatively intermittent energy, and you need to be able to complement these sources of energy with an energy which is, as we call it, dispatchable. That means that you get it when you need it on the power network. And clearly, gas-fired power plant, a mix of combined cycle and open cycle gas turbines, does the trick of completing very rapidly any need for power when wind and solar are giving you irregular power. So that's the second reason, because gas is a good complement to renewable electric power, why gas is part of the transition. The third reason is that all the studies show that if you use the power network and the gas network, and where possible also the district heating and cooling network together in a global optimization, you get an energy system which is at the same time more resilient and less costly than if you deal with any energy vector separately. And that's a very important piece which makes gas part of the transition. Now, if we come to the current gas crisis, we must recognize that these crises have an impact on the way we see the role of gas in the energy transition. First, one of the first impacts is that it does slow down the replacement of coal by gas. We have even seen in Europe, but in other parts of the world, coal-fired power plants which were due to close, reopen, because gas was not available, and therefore people needed to keep these coal-fired power plants open. We have also seen some nuclear power plants, by the way, which were due to be commissioned. They have seen their lifetime extended so as to supply more power. In terms of substitution from coal to gas, China has shown a high capacity to slow down their effort. And the reason why China has been sending back LNG back to Europe in the current price environment that Alex described is because they were slowing down the replacement of coal by gas. Second thing that we see with the crisis, and Alex did mention it, is the acceleration of the development of renewable power. Because obviously at the current price of gas and power, particularly in Europe, well, renewable power, be it wind or solar, appear to be a very cheap solution compared to the current price of power. So therefore, we expect that the current crisis will accelerate the development of renewable energy, wind, solar, but also biomethane, because the development of biogas and biomethane at the current prices of gas is highly profitable. You can sell biomethane at 1.5 times the cost of production without even taking into account the environmental advantage, which should be also priced in the price of biomethane. And to take an example, in its Repower EU program, the European Commission said that we should accelerate the production of biomethane to reach 35 BCM by 2030. And the European Biogas Association says that we could reach 150 BCM by 2050. 150 BCM, it's exactly the Russian gas which is missing in Europe. So it means that by 2050, biogas produced in Europe could replace the total amount of Russian gas that we were receiving last year. Third point about what impacts the current crisis has is the destruction of demand. And the destruction of demand does appear because the price of gas is so high that if you are running an industry with relatively low value added and high energy cost, and I can take two examples. If you are making bricks, you need a lot of energy, and you cannot sell bricks at the same price as gold or titanium. So then you shut down your plant at the current price of gas because you cannot afford to pay gas at this price. If you are making fertilizer, well, you know that the farmers will not pay fertilizer at very high prices. And with the current price of gas, you just cannot afford to run your plant, so you stop it. So we see demand destruction happening. And unfortunately, we think that part of this demand will never come back because some of the plants will remain shut down for so long that probably they will never come back. So yes, we are very much in favor of reducing the demand as much as possible, but what we see happening today with the current level of prices is sheer demand destruction and not an orderly reduction of demand to adjust to the level of gas supply which is available. That's why, by the way, I do not share Alex's views on price cap. I think a price cap is a necessity and that it will happen. It should have happened, in fact, 5 months ago already, because there is no sense. Everything that leads to demand destruction appears at a price around, let's say, 60 euros per megawatt hour. So when we are paying 200, it's just crazy. It doesn't give a different signal. Paying 200 or paying 60 is the same completely crazy, unaffordable price. So it means that most of the industry which are using gas have to close down. And therefore, we should really put a price cap. Third point I want to make is that clearly the renewable gases will play a major role in the future of gas in the energy transition. I have already spoken of biogas, which has a huge potential, but we should also mention waste to gas. Waste to gas has a very significant potential. You know, there is a lot of plastics and so on that you cannot really recycle and that you could convert to gas. There are also some waste, liquid waste that you could convert to gas in what we call a hydrothermal gasification. We already in France have some pilots on such processes, and we start producing some waste to gas. Naturally, different forms of hydrogen will play a major role. Everybody is speaking of green hydrogen and blue hydrogen, but I'm a strong believer in turquoise hydrogen. That means hydrogen from methane pyrolysis, which give you hydrogen on one side and black carbon on the other side. So avoiding CO2 is also a very good solution. And I should remind everybody that there is also natural hydrogen. And we as Engie are trying to produce natural hydrogen in countries like Brazil. So on the other hand, natural gas with CCS will also be a solution. And we see in Europe, Norway developing a CCS project, which is called Northern Light, where they are storing CO2 and which will allow some further natural gas consumption in the process. So we strongly believe that renewable and low carbon gases will be part of the final picture and not only part of the transition. Okay. As a conclusion, I just wanted to mention that for me, the jury is still out to decide if the current gas crisis will accelerate or slow down the transition. My personal feeling is that it will rather accelerate than slow down, but there are different elements playing in different ways, and it's very difficult to guess what the final balance will be. But my strong conviction is that gas will play a major role in the final picture after the energy transition, and that renewable and low carbon gases will be the main part of this gas that we will have in 2050. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your words, Didier. Super clear. I totally share your last words. How different kind of gas are going to be part, not only for the transition, but also of the final picture. Let me make you some questions that I write down. You talk about biogas and biomethane, which we know is the decomposition of organic material. No? So do we have enough of that material to actually reach the number that you told us?
Well, this matter has been studied very closely in Europe. And initially, there were different initiatives in Europe. In some countries, they used maize or different agricultural production to make biogas. But we consider that it's not the right way to do it. And therefore, today, most of the countries like France and some other are limiting the amount of dedicated crops that you can put into your biogas to 15%, which means that 85% of what you put in your digester to make biogas will be waste from agriculture, from cattle, from agro-industry, and it will be also intermediate crops which protect the soil during two normal crops that you are growing. And therefore, there is no competition between food for human beings or food for animals and the production of biogas. And with this very important criterion, still, the European Biogas Association says we can produce at least 150 BCM. That's the equivalent of Russian gas that we purchased in 2021. So we are confident that biogas will have a very significant role in the future picture.
Perfect. Thank you, Didier. Just another additional question. Green hydrogen has been spoken around the world. Like we know in Chile, we're super excited in regard to this like projects, you know that. We have some like pilots in the south and there are other ones in the north of our country, but you talk about a different kind of hydrogen. Can you tell us a little bit more about it? And just in a few words, like which is the level of development of each one of them?
Well, obviously, everybody is thinking of what we call blue hydrogen. That's hydrogen made from natural gas with carbon capture, or green hydrogen, because in both cases it's low carbon. And green hydrogen is done with renewable electricity and water electrolysis. But there are many more ways to produce hydrogen. I did mention turquoise. Turquoise is methane pyrolysis. The advantage is you don't produce CO2, you produce black carbon. There is a market for black carbon. So therefore, you don't have the issue of capturing your CO2. And there are many more. I mentioned natural hydrogen because you have to know that something like 23 million tons of hydrogen are naturally produced in the world by the soil. And most of it is going into the atmosphere. I didn't mention, but we can speak of hydrogen directly from biomass. You can speak of hydrogen directly from photolysis of water molecule. It does work in laboratory. It will not be on the market before 6, 7, 8 years from now. But if it works, you just need sun and water, and you make hydrogen. So I think we will see a lot of different ways of producing low carbon hydrogen in the future. And it's natural that today we focus on green hydrogen, but we should not forget all the other ways of producing low carbon hydrogen because they will play a role.
Perfect. Diversification is the key, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you, Didier. Thank you for your words. Let's go now with our last panelist. Nos acompaña ahora Nasirov.
We have Shahriyar Nasirov. He's a PhD in economics and politics. He is an adjunct professor of the Faculty of Engineering and Sciences of Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez. The majority of his work and studies have been published in prestigious journals in the field of energy policies, and has worked in many financing projects, public financing projects as PI and associate. His presentation is the future of natural gas in Chile, security and energy transition. We'll be moving away a bit from foreign policy to focus on the country situation.
Thank you.
Chat, the floor is yours.
The great presentations for my colleagues, and I really enjoy for being here and as a member of our academy, and we always enjoy this time of the spaces we can share our experiences, our opinions. Thank you, and also thank you for all the the participants. Yeah, in my presentation, I will focus on in two important points, and one of them, in the first part, I will try to speak a bit about the progress of the Chilean energy matrix and how what has been important changes in the Chilean energy matrix over the years, over the last decades. And also based on this concept, we will understand about energy security. What are the key elements of the energy security? Why we should be care about the energy security? Yeah, this is let me just and I try to show with this, come up with this, a couple of the figure, the background information about the Chilean energy matrix. And Chile energy matrix as a Latin American, and as you may know that, and Latin American country, most of them has been a traditional hydro-dominant the matrices, yeah, hydro-dominant energy sectors. But starting from the 1990s, as the economy started to grow, and there have been appearance of different technologies, and especially, and the country has experienced to see the coal expansion. Yeah, and basically, I mean, through this period, and country and I divided this in two periods, and before the renewables and after the renewables. Yeah, and through these periods, we can see that the country has experienced a different kind of challenging and also some crisis period we have experienced. So, and from in the first period where we see the hydroelectricity and coal-based energy sector, and through and this period basically the sector has been quite volatile with the availability of the hydro sources. So during the 1998 and 9, and country has experienced an energy crisis because of the hydro crisis. Yeah, and after in 2000 almost, and during the end of the 19th, and country has received for the first time natural gas. Yeah, so this is entrance of natural gas actually has been a positive shock to the economy, because at that time economy has started to grow, and this is because of different reasons, and the natural gas has helped the economy because of the relatively clean sources, and also has been a cheaper sources, that because natural gas came from Argentina. But this period unfortunately hasn't been for a long time. After almost a decade, we experienced the gas curtailments from the Argentina. Actually, it has this gas curtailment has been quite important, has provided important impacts on, and not only the energy sector but also the economy. As we see the graph, we see that. And we in 2000, almost 2004, the economy has been dependent, almost 35% of all the energy consumption has been based on Argentinian gas. But almost after 4 years, this we experienced a rapid drop in this scenario. Almost 2008, this percentage has reached to the less than 10%. Yeah, and these additions has been compensated basically with the expensive and diesel motors, and also this addition has entered about LNG, new LNG sources, and also some carbon and coal expansions. So, and how we can an important in this period, and what is our important messages, and two important messages we can take in this period, because during this period and main energy policy of Chilean regulator has focused on attracting of the investment, and rather than competition, like my colleagues have talked in the European case, because a country over the significant period suffered to attract enough investment in the sector. So this is actually, we pay the price, the country paid the price. And so in two important points during this period, dependence of an external energy sources will almost reach 60 and 75%, depending on availability of hydro sources. And also, we observed that development of the power sector has failed to keep up with the economic growth. Yeah, this is an important period and an important a point that we experienced before renewable energy. So what happened and from 2013 almost from 2010, we have a country has experienced totally from a resource independent country, we converted that actually energy independent country in that sense. So what we have observed, and basically thanks to different factors and technological advancement in renewable energy technologies, and also develop a potential of the renewable energy sources, and made and a country is one of the key hubs in renewable energy investments. So, and basically one of sometimes I talk with my colleagues in Europe, actually what we have resources in renewable energy resources in Chile is not comparable with other countries, because we have almost double sources than are in Europe and other course. This is of course these factors that made Chile one of the very interesting place for renewable energy. That's from 2000 and almost we have seen huge amount of investment and came into the sector. Yeah, for example, if you think about 2005, we had zero potential in solar, in 2022, and we have almost 5 giga, and solar almost 18%. Together with the solar and wind capacity, we have almost 31% and renewable energy. And so we have a gas and a 13%. And what is here as a consequence of, and I would say the one important factor, 2020, and so we have almost 40% of foreign direct investment in a country came from renewable energy sector. I mean, today energy sector, renewable energy sector is one of the key sector after the mining in the industry. So, and this is as a consequences, and what I'm trying to say, and in this renewable area, and the main policy objectives of the government obviously has been different, and has been new elements has appeared in the policy making. Yeah, and one of the key elements in the policy making are decarbonization of this sector. At the same time, how to push the competition, right? And because these terms almost 10 years ago wasn't the main discussion, yeah, because we lacked so many decades and to provide investment. But here in this case, the scenario is different. We receive a lot of investment, but new challenges is coming up. One of the the challenges obviously is now we have a renewable energy target, 80% or by 2030 to provide a sector from renewable energy sources. So another important challenge is a coal power and phasing out of coal power plants. That today we have almost 4,500 mega capacity, and replaced with the renewables and replaced with other sources. I mean, this is actually a quite challenging, challenging concept, challenging the work. And so in 2005, to get the net zero. So, and now is a question is under these ambitious scenarios, how we can actually provide and how we can provide energy security, right? And energy security, actually, this concept sometimes has been misunderstood for many for many literature, and also it has a different kind of explanation for this this concept. Actually, the component of these dimensions and the component of parameters of this concept is changing and is depending the country. For example, and because why is energy security is important? Because in the sector, and energy is a complex product, has different implications and policy, regulatory, economic, environmental, social, technical, and other implication has that makes totally different product than other markets. So that's why we have to care about the energy security. And also this concept has changed through the time period. For example, sometimes, I mean, maybe 20 years ago, some dimensions or some the parameters we couldn't include it in this concept. For example, during the 90s, social environmental dimensions were not in this concept, but nowadays we have to care about this. So, and also, and since the orientation or since the direction of this sector is changing, the new concept is starting to appear. For example, the cyber attacks, cyber security stuff, or for example, and decentralization of energy and brought new concept. For example, they always for a long time period, and when we're talking about energy security, we always thought about the supply side. But now we always thought that the demand is always inelastic. So we always concentrated on a supply, but now things are changing. So we have to, when you're thinking about the security, we have to always also talk about the security demand, not only supply. So and under this concept, and what is the matter and how we can and provide a security, energy security. The one thing is very important, energy security. I always like the phrase of British Prime Minister Churchill made a famous statement: security lies in diversification, right? I mean, this is still this statement, this famous statement is still valid. Why it's valid? Because of the lack of diversification, during the history, we always paid the price. And actually economy paid the price. For example, today is an over-expansion, over-dependence of natural gas sources from Russian. Europe now pays prices. For example, in Chile, we have in a certain period of time, we have been 35% dependent on Argentinian gas. We also pay the price. And for example, not only conventional sources, also it's very interesting that renewable sources also pay the price. For example, Texas case. In a Texas case, and very recently, we have very cold days, and the big part of the system has been dependent on wind energy sources, and this is in a country has lived several days of blackouts. So what is this? How we can diversify? And now under this concept, importance that's how we diversify, how make our good diversification, and considering of this different type of the risks. Yeah, we have policy risk, regulatory risk, the environmental risks. This is, I think, this concept today is important, because this, and if you want to make our security, provide energy security, we have to build how well we allocate, how well we deal with the different kind of risks. Yeah. So this is in a case, and what I'm thinking about, what's going to be the role of the natural gas perspective in Chile in terms of energy security. I have basically three main messages. One of the messages is we have nowadays we have rapid expansion of renewable energy sources in a country. We have, but nowadays, how we can accommodate these resources? This is the question. So we have day by day, year by year, we have received a lot of investment, but nowadays the main question is how we accommodate this. So it will depend on a lot of enabling technologies. And when we think about enabling technologies, it can be different kind of. We can think about for example, the storage technologies or hydrogen or etc. Do you have enabling technologies? Unfortunately, all of them are on the table, but what we have now, and this, I think, meanwhile, and this is we have a development stage of enabling technologies. I think the gas, natural gas, can provide important role in the Chilean energy matrix, and especially what we have in the coal exit. And what we have and the facing how the coal sector, and also the previously mentioned the Carlos, and how are we going to compensate of this 4,500 megawatt capacity? Because if we phase out 4,500 megawatt capacity coal, we have to compensate almost 25 giga or 20,000 mega at least renewable capacity. So the important thing is how we accommodate such a big amount of renewable capacity in the system. So there are a lot of options, obviously, but I think in this sense, in a gas sector at least, and it can play an important role in the short and medium term in Chile. So, and also in the second my message, and also in this gas-fired power plants, it can play as an important and strategic role, especially in the capacity markets, because as we talk about it from a technical dimension, if you take about the energy security, and from a technical dimension, and gas has proven through different decades. So this can provide as actually the health of the system, and or providing stability and reliability of the system. Another important, a third in a long run option, I would say the role of the gas, there would be experience actually. An experience of the gas, it can push, as my other colleagues mentioned, and push for the green hydrogen economy. So this is, I think, and it is because we have different infrastructures and also the experience of the gas sector, and it can push development of green hydrogen, also biogas sector in the future. Yeah, that's from my. I try to be brief in my presentation, but I will be more than happy to answer your question or discuss these works. Obviously, this is actually a very broad term. So, and we could spend maybe weeks or hours, but to talk about these works. But I would be very pleased to talk. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Shah, for your presentation. Just one little question. We don't have too much time left, so but I don't want to miss this. Like you already talk about the stability and the reliability of the system, and the complement of natural gas in our system is also what Didier talked us before. Therefore, taking in consideration the importance of the role of the natural gas, what effect can you think of could be expected from the current gas crisis from Chilean energy security?
Yeah, I mean, actually, this is this crisis, because I mean, gas market different from the oil markets, is a regional-oriented market, and today and after the gas curtailment in Argentina, we still this process and since that reactivating process with the gas, and I mean, some proportion of the gas we still receive from the Argentina. I think this is sometimes, and this is to provide some kind of security in that sense, because I mean, because now there's a real problem now, real competition in the LNG market, because the LNG market is obviously is very competitive. You know, that's nowadays, and it is a big market appeared, as my colleagues say. This is in Europe, so in obviously LNG market will get affected. Yeah, this is the key issue. So what we expect as far as this crisis continue, obviously, and Chile also will be affected on LNG markets. Yeah.
Thank you, Cha, for your answer. Antes de pasar a la última ronda de preguntas, me encantaría darle la palabra a Daniel Olivares. Como le comenté, Daniel es director ejecutivo de Centra, que es el Centro de Transición Energética de la Facultad de Ingeniería y Ciencia de la Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez.
The president of the Energy Department in Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez. So Daniel, please, the floor is yours.
Gracias, Patricia.
Thank you, Patricia. Can you hear me? Yes. I would like to thank once again to our speakers, Alex, Didier, and Shahriyar, and to you, Patricia, for moderating as well. I would like to say that from the Center for Energy Transition of Universidad Adolfo Ibáñez, we have been working from the beginning of the year to move to an efficient and socially just transition in Chile. And we are working on solving different challenges that we see often and that appears as we move in the process. We are working in research with everyone in the academic world, here with the society, but now we also want to have an open discussion in the energy sector. And we believe that a safe, efficient, and fair transition requires an unbiased view on what each technology needs to do. And in this context, as a center, we are committed to the promotion of a science-based discussion where we can reach an agreement and to successfully move to a transition working with the public and private sector. And this event is just part of that commitment. And we would like to say thanks to AGN because he's opening this space for us. And I just want to say thank you, and hopefully the presentations were interesting. Now we can move to the discussion. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Daniel. And I would like to thank the presentations because all of them were great. The brief ideas that we needed to raise in this international webinar. And I would like to move to a final round of questions. Alex, considering the geopolitical crisis in Europe,
what are the possibilities for Russia to sell gas elsewhere other than Europe now or in the long term? What do you think?
Fairly limited. Most of Russia's gas exports went to Europe, and not just the EU and EU 27 plus the UK, but also Turkey, if we include that in the wider definition. So the exports to Turkey via Turkstream, for example, are likely to continue. But as I mentioned, the exports to Europe, if they do continue at all, they'll be at a much lower level. And the problem is that the pipelines connecting the gas fields that produce that gas in Siberia, they only connect to the European market. They don't go elsewhere. There is a pipeline that connects other gas fields to China, the power of Siberia, but it's not connected to the fields that supply Europe. So if Russia wants to export its gas elsewhere, it has to build new infrastructure. And to give you a sense of scale, power of Siberia, I think, is about 30 billion cubic meters a year. The pipeline capacity that went into Europe, well, we know that flows were 180 BCM a year, but the actual pipeline capacity was much greater than that. So the only other thing that gives is if they're not going to build more pipeline infrastructure, and by the way, it's a long way from the fields to China and expensive, is to increase LNG exports. But again, they'd have to build up their LNG capacity, and there may also be issues in terms of access to liquefaction technology. Because of sanctions, they'd have to make sure that all the technology that they used was Russian produced, as it were. And I'm not sure how much of an impact that would have, but I think it might have an impact. So the tragedy of this situation is that we had a fantastic symbiotic type relationship whereby Europe provided stable demand and could pay for gas supplies and paid very good money. Gazprom got more for its gas selling into Europe than it did selling in its own market in Russia. And in return, Europe got access to relatively low-cost gas supplies. And that worked for a very long time. Because of the actions of President Putin and what Gazprom has done since the beginning of this year, that has been basically destroyed. So it is quite apart from the human tragedy in Ukraine, there is a definite economic tragedy here as well.
Of course, totally. Thank you, Alex, for your answer. Didier, I have an additional question for you that I received, especially made from Carlos Cortez. What is Europe doing to develop the massive investments that are required to develop in LNG infrastructure and downstream pipeline capacity? and a long-term supply contract to subsidize Russian gas, particularly in light of this energy transition. Do you think that there are corrective incentives right now for companies to make these long-term investments?
Well, you have to separate two things. The investment which are to be made in Europe in form of LNG import capacity and pipelines. And this is happening. Today, I think there are more than 10 projects currently ongoing to put new FSRUs, that means floating regasification terminals, in Europe. You have at least 2 in Italy, you have 1 in France, you have 2 in the Netherlands, you have 5 or 6 in Germany, you have 1 in Estonia, you have 1 in Slovenia, and so on. So, and on top of that, you have projects for increasing capacity in existing LNG terminals or for creating new land-based LNG terminals. And in terms of pipes, there are some projects happening to reinforce pipes inside Europe, or just to make possible movement which were not possible. Just to take an example, it was impossible until last month to send gas from France to Germany. Everything was only planned to send gas from Germany to France, and it was not possible to work the other way around. And the transmission system operators have been working hard, and now we are able to send back gas from France to Germany. So inside Europe, it's happening. The problem is, what is not happening currently is European utilities signing long-term contracts with producer elsewhere in order to secure long-term supply of LNG or pipe gas to replace the Russian supply, at least to a certain extent, within the next 4 years or 5 years, let's say. And here it's not happening, and it's really worrying. There are several reasons. One of them being that the European Union has given contradictory signals. Some of them saying we don't need more gas, some of them saying we need more gas in 2030, so that everybody is lost and that there is no security of demand. And how could you sign contracts for new gas to Europe for 20 years when some papers from the Commission are saying we don't need any gas in 2030, any new gas, I mean, in 2030. Second illustration of this contradiction, today it's impossible for European public banks, but also for private banks, because of their ESG commitment, to finance such gas producing project. So you are going to the US or going to, let's say, Turkmenistan and saying, well, we would like your gas on a 20 years contract, and so you need to invest. And by the way, our banks are not considering lending you money because we consider that gas is dirty and we should not invest in gas. So there is a contradiction here that we need to solve in order to be able to secure the long-term supply that we need. And we are working on that. What the Commission recently announced on joint purchasing is not working as such, but it just shows that the Commission is realizing that we need to give a signal that we want, as Europeans, to buy more gas, and that may help. But we are still in the middle of this contradiction. So on one side, we are investing in Europe to be able to welcome more LNG and more pipe gas. On the other side, we are not buying long-term this new gas to replace Russian supply. And for instance, if you look at the contract which has been signed in 21 and 22 for new LNG, most of them were signed by China and not by Europe, which is worrying.
No, definitely. I totally agree with you. Like, this is a contradiction that needs to be resolved in the short time, because if it's not, we're going to come back to the carbon intensive fuels if that is something that we don't want it to happen. We don't want demand to keep destroying. So yeah, that the investment and the certainty that this gas is going to be needed in the long time is definitely the key for this energy transition. Shah, one last question for you. We talk about security, the energy security in Chile, but I just want to put some focus on what do you think are the main challenge that our country, Chile, is going to face in the next years in regard to this energy transition and the security of the system?
Yeah, Patricia, thank you for your question. I mean, I think this is a country goes through different challenges. You know, the scenario, we have a bit different scenario than Europe is, I don't know, is it fortunate or not fortunate, but we have a different scenario. This is a scenario that we have excess amount of, the renewables enters. One of the key challenges we have are regulatory challenges. So how we accommodate this, how we create the proper incentives, to accommodate this renewable energy, or also attract more renewable energy, more clean energy sources in the economy. This is I think this is one of the key issues. The key challenge is a regulatory challenge. We got a lot of new enabling technologies are entering the market, but they don't know how they be remunerated, how they will be. Market has to be designed to send an efficient signal for these enabling technologies. This is one side. Another side, the market is going because of the new technology. Renewable technologies are characteristics, intermittency and variability, and the system. There are a lot of technical challenges, and these technical challenges, obviously, and sometimes diversification. And I think this is one of the important things, and how you diversify your sources there to handle this technical challenges. That's what I would do. These two important challenges we face in Chile in terms of energy security.
Thank you, Cha. Bueno, agradecerles mucho las presentaciones, agradecerles demasiado a las personas que se han mantenido conectados con nosotros en este webinar.
I would like to thank for the presentations for everyone who joined us today. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Didier. Thank you, Shahriyar, for your presentations. Once again, everything very precise and concise in order to show the challenges that the energy transition is going to face, not only in Chile, but in the world. We have some final remarks. The situation in the world, we know it's clear. COVID first, and the war in Ukraine, it's making really difficult to walk the path that we are trying to walk for the decarbonization and the process for energy transition and everything that the world is trying to do for 2050. The world needs energy, that's clear. It needs energy, infrastructure in such a way that we can move away from the more contaminant energy and to completely switch that to LNG. Hopefully the market will go in line with this, and for companies to be able to carry out the necessary investment to avoid any lack of energy, and for countries to contribute with the regulatory and political decisions so we can allow this certainty and investment that we require in order to have safe and clean energy as soon as possible. I would like to thank for the invitation to Centra and ANG, and thank you for each one of our panel members. Thank you for your participation on today's webinar. It was a pleasure, and see you next time.